Hi everyone, I'm Dr. John Douillard, and Ayurveda is the science of life. It's a study of nature, a very in-depth study of nature. And I want to talk to you today about a concept where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. This is actually something very true in nature. Although in nature we have this thing called the survival of the fittest, which is sort of a misinterpretation of what Darwin had in mind when he wrote the book on the origin of species, when he talked about natural selection, which was sort of how we adapt to a changing environment to actually help our offspring, future generations, survive better. It wasn't that the survival of the fittest, that only the strong survive. That was something that a subsequent philosopher biologist, Herbert Spencer, talked about, and Darwin sort of went along with it, but he always talked about it from an adaptation to the local environment, not that only the strong survive, because only the strong survive. The survival of the fittest does not exist in the world of trees. I've been reading a book that I absolutely love called The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wohlleben, who I hope to get on a podcast soon. And he wrote this incredible book called The Hidden Life of Trees and writes some pretty amazing things. And definitely one thing to know is that the survival of the fittest does not take place in the forest. It is not a tree thing, okay? So he talks about how in nature, in the forest, for example, a giraffe will come and start eating some acacia leaves of a tree. And the acacia tree doesn't like that. But in slow motion, about 1/3 of an inch per hour, the tree will start to produce a chemical, a toxic chemical that makes the leaves taste very bitter. And then about an hour of feeding, the giraffe has to leave. Along the way, the tree is also starting to put out a gas called ethylene gas that spreads for about 100 yards to all the acacia trees to let them know that this giraffe is feeding and to start doing their slow motion 1/3 inch per hour production of this chemical to make the leaves taste really bad to the giraffe. So in this case, the giraffe gets fed. It's not allowed to become greedy and just eat the entire tree and kill the tree, but it has to move on beyond 100 yards and graze and allow to get its fair share, and the balance of nature, the circle of life, continues. In another report, another study, insects will eat the leaves of a tree. And when they do that, the tree can actually taste the saliva of that insect and determine what type of insect it is, and determine what type of predator might actually eat that insect that's chewing on my leaves. And in slow motion, again at 1/3 per inch per hour, the tree starts to produce a pheromone. And if that insect is still chewing on the leaves and threatening the tree, that pheromone will be released to attract another insect, a bigger, stronger insect, that will actually gobble up the insect that has become greedy and eating too much of the tree. If the insect would just eat a little and move on, none of that would happen. The balance of life is maintained. It's such a beautiful, beautiful understanding of how nature works, as in the concept that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So the idea of the survival of the fittest doesn't really exist in tree land, because there's a underlying network that communicates all the trees, species to species, competitor species and species within species, all the trees within the same species. The oaks communicate with the birch, and the birch with the beech. They all communicate with an underground network described by Dr. Suzanne Simard. She's a PhD researcher at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, and she coined the phrase the wood wide web, which is a fungal network that communicates and connects all the root tips of all the trees and sends warning signals, nutrient signals, information, fiber optic network from tree to tree, from species to species, and it's an underground communication network. So warning signals are communicated even to the competitive species. So it's not just only my own group, my own club, my own group of trees gets to survive. Everybody survives in the forest, because in the forest, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. They did another study where they actually measured in a beech forest photosynthesis. And they measured the big trees, the strong trees, the weak trees, the small trees, the baby trees, and they measured the photosynthesis that was taking place in these trees. Now, photosynthesis comes from the leaves of the tree, so the bigger the tree, the bigger the canopy of the tree, you would expect more photosynthesis. But to the surprise of the researchers, all the trees, the baby ones, the weak ones, the big ones, the strong ones, they all had the same level of photosynthesis. And they couldn't understand how that could be, because we all know, we all were taught in biology class that photosynthesis takes place on the leaves for the most part, and that's what drives the energy of the tree, and therefore the big one should have more, but they didn't. They all had the same. And when they measured how that was happening, it was taking place in the wood wide web, or the fungal network, the fiber optic network, which is miles. 1 teaspoon of soil has miles of this fungal fiber optic network of communication. So it's massive and pervasive. That network was feeding and making sure every one of the trees, big, small, weak, strong, all got their fair share of nutrition. So the trees that were pumping in a lot of sugar and a lot of nutrients from photosynthesis would take it into the roots and dispense that to the weaker trees, so they all got fed. Because again, the whole was greater than the sum of the parts. That if the forest was weakened and the little trees didn't fill the gaps in the canopy, and only had big trees, and you lost one big tree, you would have this big gap where rain and sun and the moisture, the sun could dry out the forest floor. It could alter the microbiome, alter the fungal network. Everyone survives when the whole forest is intact. Doesn't matter if you're big or small. Doesn't matter if you're weak or strong. Doesn't matter if you're old, young, or a baby. Everybody is a part of the whole, and they're all critically important. And the forest and the network of the forest, which, by the way, is really, really ancient. I mean, the oldest tree that we know that lives in California to this day is 5,063 years, 2 years old. 5,000 years old, a tree still alive. There's a lot of wisdom in the ability to stay alive that long. And that's something that I really think that we may want to just take a lesson from the wisdom of the trees. That whether you're big or small, young or old, weak or strong, we all matter. And that the whole, when we're all together with all of our differences, we actually make up the whole, and we're much stronger as a whole than we are as individual parts. And I think that's the world that we live in is becoming whole, hopefully, soon. And how if we could mimic nature and the wisdom of the trees and the wisdom of the forest, where the whole is critically important, and some of the parts make up the whole, but the parts are nowhere near as strong as the whole. And that's a message I think that we can take into our worlds, and realizing that we all are one people, and we have to consider ourselves as one people and treat each other as one people, because together we are way stronger than we are apart. Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. John Douillard. Do you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe and share.
This recording is brought to you by LifeSpa, where ancient Ayurvedic wisdom meets modern science. Get access to free health video newsletters by Dr. John at lifespa.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.